It was not a typical steel company. It was so far away geographically from the heart of the steel industry. It never got caught up in all of the steel industry sort of culture.
It was that old, innovative, pioneering mode, if you want to call it. If we need to do something, let's try to do it.
IPSCO was viewed as being very lean and mean, very efficient place compared to the other steel companies.
You had to do two things really well, be best in class in both. One was to make and one is to sell.
It's always been a good place to work. Things are always exciting, and things always change.
The story of IPSCO begins here in Saskatchewan, Canada. As one of the three prairie provinces, Saskatchewan is part of Canada's breadbasket, much of its economy tied to the roller coaster fortunes of agriculture, an industry forever at the mercy of the weather. The Great Depression of the 1930s is testament to that dependency, as drought ravages prairie farmland. By the end of World War II, Saskatchewan is deeply in debt. But its new provincial government is trying to change that. Premier Tommy Douglas, a charismatic Baptist preacher turned politician, heads the first socialist government in North America. But despite their political persuasion, Douglas and his CCF party firmly believe that a planned economy must include private enterprise.
It was an environment not unlike today when governments, prairie governments, very much wanted to diversify their economies and get something other than agriculture as the basis of their economy. And in 1950, the provincial government had set up a small office, an industrial development office, whose job was to go out there and see if they could get some industry.
By the 1950s, the Saskatchewan economy is expanding, but the province must import cement from plants in Alberta, Manitoba, and the United States, often paying the highest price in the country. What Saskatchewan needs is a cement plant of its own. By 1955, one of the government's key industrial projects is the construction of a cement plant in Saskatchewan.
And in due course, a cement plant was set up. And this was a deal of having a package that the Industrial Development Office worked up and see if they could get some entrepreneurs, some sponsors who would run with it.
He was born in Texas, I think, and then he went to work for Henry Kaiser in his cement plant, and then he came up to work for a cement company in Vancouver. They heard about Tommy Douglas's intentions to try to industrialize more of Saskatchewan.
His name is William Sharp, an American chemical engineer who has spent the last 20 years managing other people's cement companies. His dream is a company of his own, and Saskatchewan might just be the place to fulfill that dream. Bill Sharp travels to Regina, the provincial capital, and meets with Don Black, director of Saskatchewan's Industrial Development Office. Black agrees to support the project by making the proposed plant sole supplier for all government projects. But Sharp will have to raise the money to build it. Sharp takes the deal back to the Marwell Group, a Vancouver investment firm headed by Douglas Welch and Hugh Martin. They like the idea and arrange for Sharp to meet with their top dealmaker, a man named Jack Turvey. Born in Saskatchewan and raised in Vancouver by his widowed mother, Jack Turvey is small in stature, but has a reputation for being a tough scrapper who never backs down. Just the man to get this deal off the ground.
This was an extraordinary character, feisty, very determined, very strategic, a fighting Irishman, a drinker of Scotch Deluxe, pugnacious, entrepreneurial, charming when he wanted to be, mean when he wanted to be, a leader for his time.
The result is the Saskatchewan Cement Plant, incorporated in September 1955. The $8 million project is an immediate moneymaker for all investment partners. For Bill Sharp, its success only whets his appetite for more. It is 1956, and Saskatchewan appears to be on its way to diversifying its economy. Besides the cement plant, several other industrial proposals are in the works, including 2 pipe mills vital to the province's expanding oil and gas operations. For Premier Tommy Douglas and his government, things couldn't be rosier until both pipe deals fall through. Industrial Development Director Don Black asks Bill Sharp if he would like to get into the steel pipe business. Don Sharp replies, "I thought you'd never ask." Once again, Sharp must find the financing, and this time he looks eastward to Winnipeg and an investment firm headed by Goin South.
When Sharp and Turvey came to see me in 1955 at our office in Winnipeg, they wanted to start this pipe mill. And who would have thought of building a pipe mill in Regina? We spent most of a day together. And so I and some of my associates thought about it, and a couple of days later said that yes, we would go ahead and finance it.
The new venture is called Prairie Pipe, located 2 miles north of Regina. Even while it is under construction, Bill Sharp and Jack Turvey scan the prairie horizon for their next opportunity. (1957). In its first 2 months of operation, Prairie Pipe has already doubled its output. Its early success based on contracts with the Saskatchewan government. Like its competitors, the company makes pipe from huge steel coils called scalp that are rolled and welded into the desired shape. 75% of the mill's total production cost is the purchase of the steel from which the pipe is made. But Bill Sharp has a wild idea. Why not eliminate the middleman and make their own steel? His idea is to build a small-scale steel plant using an electric arc furnace and Steckel mill to produce scalp for Prairie Pipe, as well as steel plate and sheet for local markets.
I don't think Sharp knew anything about making steel, but these people could spot an economic opportunity and go with it, put together a package, go around and sell it to people, and gather up people who would say, well, I'd be prepared to risk $1 million on that.
A feasibility study tells Sharp that his idea may not be that wild, as long as he can keep the costs down by installing used equipment. Still, the risks are huge. While the cement plant and pipe mill have a strong local market, a steel mill will have to go toe-to-toe with established industry giants in eastern Canada.
In the sense that we used to jokingly say we're going to make Regina the Pittsburgh of the prairies. Well, this is a pretty unlikely Pittsburgh, and I don't know why the Sharp, Turvey and Company felt that they could make a go of it here. They had, as it happened, a government which was receptive to them, or willing to put up money, primarily because they believed these fellows were good operators. They could sense a deal and make it happen.
Making the deal happen is not easy. Even pipe company board member Goin South is skeptical about a steel mill in the prairie wilderness, especially one that plans to use scrap as its main source of stock.
We had a study done by an eminent consulting firm, and they came up with the conclusion that there was not sufficient scrap, which makes you laugh today, but there we were.
The availability of scrap is certainly an issue, until Bill Sharp identifies one important source indicative of the plant's prairie location: old machinery littering many Saskatchewan farmyards. That, along with railway and automobile stock, will help keep scrap costs within budget. October 22nd, 1957. Premier Tommy Douglas turns the sod on the site of the new steel plant adjacent to Prairie Pipe. Financing is finally in place, with loan guarantees from the Saskatchewan government. The enterprise known as the Interprovincial Steel Corporation is officially underway. By 1959, Prairie Pipe employs 131 people and runs 3 shifts a day, 6 days a week. The neighboring steel plant is still under construction, and the company is more or less broke.
I don't think any one of us had ever been at a steel mill before. I think that we didn't realize what problems there were at that time in starting up and running a steel mill. But we're, what you don't see, you're not afraid of.
Once again, Bill Sharp and Jack Turvey come up with an innovative solution, a reverse takeover. The more successful, smaller company, Prairie Pipe, takes over the assets of the struggling steel company. On August 25, 1959, Prairie Pipe adopts a new hybrid name, Interprovincial Steel and Pipe Corporation, also known as IPSCO. By the early 1960s, the steel mill is fully operational, but still having financial troubles. Bill Sharp is no longer involved in the day-to-day running of the company. That has been left to the able hands of Jack Turvey, with help from his management team, particularly Chief Financial Officer Jim McLennan.
Jack Turvey was a very strong person. He was a bit of a salesman, as any promoter is. But if you said, now Jack, just what is this? You got the straight goods from Turvey. And that served the company in good stead because the government had to make some very nasty decisions as to whether or not this company, which was failing, should be allowed to fail or whether it should be propped up by more government money.
The CCF government decides to stay with the project, and with the infusion of working capital, IPSCO continues to operate on the same shoestring with which it started, but operating nonetheless.
In those years, I recall analysts saying something to the effect that IPSCO had more financial capacity per ton of output than any other steel company in North America. And it really started right at the top. Turvey and his crew were financially driven folks, and Turvey was the leader of that band.
With Jack Turvey in charge, IPSCO management tackles the challenge of cutting costs and improving cash flow. To stimulate sales, Turvey sets up a committee to come up with new product ideas. One product, developed by John Coleshaw, becomes a successful spin-off. Square-shaped, hollow structural sections made from pipe that can be used in the construction industry. It is just one example of the homegrown ingenuity that keeps IPSCO alive during these turbulent times.
They had no money. We used awful lot of haywire. And old man Turvey, every time he'd come in, he said, the more haywire I see, the better I like it. Because in order to save a buck. And that's how the place got off and running.
The steel company's financial woes have an effect on its image in Regina, where some businesses refuse to cash IPSCO checks. Jack Turvey decides to prove IPSCO's value to the community with a stunt fondly remembered as $2 payday.
They phone up the bank and says, bring a paddy wagon full of $2 bills, and you set it up, and everybody got paid $2 bills. There was $2 bills for about a month in every corner of the town, just to show the city fathers, in fact, how much money does come into Regina economy from the little IPSCO here.
Well, I mean, the remarkable thing through most of this period is that they remained profitable, sometimes marginally profitable, but profitable nonetheless, which was a great tribute to scrounging around to getting the orders or to cutting the costs or cutting a deal or whatever it took. I've sat with Jack Turvey in many situations where he was cutting a deal. He would often do this with a lot of liquor, partly because he knew that he had the capacity to have 2, 3, 4 drinks of scotch and compete intellectually with somebody who was pretty much cold stone sober. The board was prepared to ride with Jack because they thought, correctly as it turned out, that Jack would solve those problems.
By the mid-1960s, IPSCO's steel production is becoming more reliable and its sales force more aggressive, winning 50% of available pipe business in Western Canada over more established competitors, including pipe mills owned by Canada's mightiest steel giant, Stelco.
There were obviously pressures from the beginning from Stelco and others to, first of all, they ignored IPSCO because it didn't matter, and then when it began to matter, to try to kind of exert competitive pressures to put it out of business or buy it.
They hated IPSCO. I mean, they were an intrusion into their business. They didn't like us at all.
Like David facing Goliath, Jack Turvey isn't about to back down. He goes on the offensive, opening a sales office in Toronto and announcing the addition of another electric arc furnace that doubles IPSCO's steel-making capacity. He also introduces new technology from Germany, a spiral mill that allows the company to make large-diameter, high-pressure pipe at a lower cost and compete directly with Stelco's production in that area.
IPSCO got a special letterhead put together when Stelco was exerting their price war stuff. Well, they used it only in communications with Stelco. But Stelco would receive it and obviously think it was IPSCO's usual letterhead, which had at the top, join us and bust the trust. So again, this reflected the kind of fight. He loved to fight.
I won't go into any of the detail, but he was one of the best swearers I've ever known. And he used some of those words in an extraordinarily appropriate fashion, which I don't think could have offended anybody. He just fitted them in so beautifully.
The breakthrough comes with the first major order for spiral pipe from Alberta Gas Trunkline. Not only is it the first high-pressure spiral pipe installation in North America, but it is technology that Stelco doesn't have. The price war is over, and IPSCO has survived the giant's attack. And it continues to survive throughout the first half of the 1970s. It is still driven by the oil and gas industry, fine-tuning its steel-making process and expanding its production facilities to meet the changing demands of pipeline customers. Expansion also crosses borders as the company makes acquisitions in British Columbia and Alberta, including 2 more pipe mills. The purchase makes IPSCO the biggest player in Western Canadian steel.
Jack was a guy that, which I didn't know at the time, likes to sort of physically challenge people. And so we're sitting across from each other, much as we are, and he'd kick me in the shins. And he kicked me again, so the second time he kicked me, I kicked him back right in the knee. And Jack was yelling at me, and I said, well, if you kick me, I'll kick you back. And the next day he offered me a job. You can't have enough adjectives to describe Jack. He was a rascal, he was a man, he was brilliant. I mean, people realized that he was brilliant. They realized he was outrageous, but they realized that he had tremendous leadership skills and really had done a terrific job for the company.
He liked to use this phrase that all he ever wanted in business was a fair advantage. And it was a kind of interesting concept that there was something fair about having an advantage over everybody all the time. But that's typical of the way he looked at everything, was that he wanted a fair advantage.
There is no question that Jack Turvey is the heart and soul of IPSCO. But as he approaches retirement age, his days as CEO are winding down, and a new era is about to begin. When Jack Turvey retires in 1976, his replacement is a man who has played an important part in the company almost from the beginning, Jim McLennan.
It's all well and good to say Turvey did this and did that, but somebody had to actually then say, okay, he's decided we're marching east. Now, let's fill in the blanks in financial, contractual, managerial terms. And that was Jim McLennan's job, and he did it extremely well.
It was a good time for the company. There was a cleanup of some of the less savory practices because the company did start out as a very rough and ready organization that had to fight hard to compete in the marketplace.
Younger men like David Sutherland and John Tulloch, hired by McLennan and the old guard to carry the IPSCO torch, find a company that still has a rough and ready edge to it.
Most of the people I was meant to be interviewed by were actually out chasing buffalo because that particular day the fence had broken down. But the company was really sort of starting to mature in a number of ways.
Tulloch and Sutherland see a company whose fortunes are still securely tied to the oil and gas industry. It is primarily a pipe company, learning all it can about making steel.
They were very important years from 76 to 82. They were the years in which IPSCO for the first time asked itself whether it had the capacity to participate, for instance, in northern pipelines. And decided yes, but only if we're prepared to engage in major expansions that are well beyond anything we've ever done before. And Jim led that initiative in his quiet, managerial fashion in that period of time. I believe that he was the right man at the right time for the company.
December 1981, the little prairie company that wasn't supposed to survive celebrates its 25th anniversary. Under the direction of Jim McLennan and his management team, IPSCO has doubled its capacity and matured into a company with 2,300 employees. But even McLennan is aware that the time has come for the company to move in a new direction.
Our management team was not functioning well. We didn't have new blood in the company with respect to the technological changes that needed to take place. It needed a different sort of a guy than Jim was.
This time, however, there is no heir apparent in head office. The search for a new CEO takes IPSCO's board of directors outside the company.
Basically what the company wanted to do was professionalize the management and to see whether this steel company and set of pipe mills could be made to become a major industrial force for the West. And that meant getting the right investment in new and sustaining technology, and that meant developing markets in a way that were not simply reliant on the next major oil and gas pipeline that was going to be built. You know, when you're trying to select the chief executive officer of an organization, as a selection committee, you really want to fall in love with the person. And Roger came in, and within half an hour, the interview turned quite strongly to us trying to sell him up on the notion of joining the company, because the committee did fall in love. There's no question about the fact that everybody said, this is the right guy.
Roger Phillips is a physics graduate of McGill University who has been with Alcan Aluminum for over 20 years. He takes over as the new IPSCO president and CEO on February 2nd, 1982.
Prior to accepting the job at IPSCO, I'd found that IPSCO was viewed as being very lean and mean, very efficient place compared to the other steel companies.
What Phillips finds on his first day, however, is a company that is not lean or mean enough, particularly in the face of an oil industry slowdown brought on by Canada's new national energy program.
And so when I walked in the door, I think we had roughly 2,200 people on the payroll, and by the end of the year we had 1,200, and that was just cutting back manufacturing activity because there were no sales.
We knew that if we didn't make the transition, we would not survive probably as an integrated steel company. We might survive as a pipe company, but we would not survive and compete with the big boys. We just wouldn't do it. So we had to shake the company apart and rebuild it.
It had to be a really sharp, smart, high-performing company. That's what it had to be from the customer's point of view, or the customers would create one.
Not long after his arrival, the winds of change that brought Roger Phillips to IPSCO begin to blow. While the company has been built on entrepreneurship and farm boy ingenuity, Phillips believes it is time to add seasoned steel industry players to the IPSCO roster.
He's like Turvey. He's almost impossible to describe. He can be anywhere from rambunctious to very, very outspoken to very, very aggressive. But on the other side, Roger has an amazing intuitive ability about people, about what has to be done. Because only a guy like Roger would have had the courage to hire, well, a guy like Milan Kasanovich.
So I get on the phone, and here's my headhunter from New York saying, got somebody different. He said, now you got to understand, he said, if this guy were hired by U.S. Steel at 8 o'clock in the morning, they'd fire him by 4 in the afternoon. He's that kind of a guy. But he said, I think you're the kind of person that could control him and use him, and that he would fit in.
Milan Kasanovich is a steelworker's son, born and bred in Pennsylvania, who sees the big steel companies die there because they don't modernize and cut costs. He's not about to let that happen at IPSCO. One of his first steps is to improve operations in the melt shop, telling workers to run the electric arc furnaces faster than they ever thought possible.
When Kasanovich came to IPSCO, it took us 4 hours to make a single heat of steel. 4 hours, we call it tap-to-tap time. And Milan, in a few months, with his ideas and everybody and motivating everybody, we managed to cut the tap-to-tap time from 4 hours to 2 hours. That was enormous improvement.
And one of the other things you have to give Roger credit for is to learning how to manage Milan and how to give him all the leash that he needed to get the job done, but not too much.
Guys like Roger Phillips and Milan Kasanovich, I call them riverboat gamblers. I mean, they look at something, think about it, let's try it. All right, and it was a thrill working with those guys because they had no idea about what you couldn't do.
Milan Kasanovich is the first of many that Phillips brings to the IPSCO team in the early 1980s. Reflecting one business pundit's advice, get the right people on the bus and in the right seats.
No one had really been in a position to have learned the kind of things that they needed to learn to move to that next step. And so it was a logical point in time that if you wanted to be a dynamic company, you really did need to bring somebody in who had done something, who had done those kind of things before.
The new IPSCO management team is a combination of old guard and new faces that gives IPSCO the best of both worlds.
You had the people here in Regina who were, very hardy, very tough, very hardworking people who understood what it was to do a day's work and what it took to succeed. You also had an influx here, what I'd call the world employment market. The kind of talent skill that you needed wasn't available in Western Canada, so we had to go almost worldwide to look for the kind of people we needed to carry on.
A new IPSCO is about to be born, one in which homegrown ingenuity and prairie grit will not be enough. In 1984, the company officially changes its name to IPSCO Inc. IPSCO, however, is still a one-trick pony, dependent on the fortunes of the oil patch.
We sold very little of our steel directly to other customers, and there was a reason for it. The kind of quality and size of coils and other things that we made was not overly saleable. So I decided we should get into product development and see where we could use our steels. It was clear to me we had to do something else about how to get our flat-rolled steel to market.
Despite the company's worst financial performance in over 10 years, or perhaps because of it, IPSCO decides to make the biggest technological advancement in its history. In the mid-'80s, much of the steel in North America, including IPSCO's, is made with ingots and soaking pits. The Japanese and other foreign producers, however, use a process known as continuous casting, which improves the quality and quantity of steel production while keeping the cost low.
We had to make a big leap forward. So that's why we decided we should put in a continuous caster, which would mean getting rid of soaking pits and a bunch of technology which was obsolete.
IPSCO had to buy a continuous caster if indeed they were going to be considered a steel maker going forward.
IPSCO builds the continuous caster in typical fashion.
When it was ultimately built, people came to the steel mill from all over the world to see what no one could believe had been done, which was to build a caster and a reheat furnace in a complete project for something like 65 million Canadian dollars that typically had cost 3 times that much.
And IPSCO has always approached new capital expenditures with the thought that this is your money and you need to try and spend it as though it was the last dollar you had. And we've been very successful in, I think, minimizing our capital expenditure cost while getting good value.
Despite the huge savings, many IPSCO employees don't trust the new technology, nicknaming it the disaster caster, something that could very well bring down the company. What it does is the exact opposite.
We were getting low demand for oil and gas, and things were shaky for 5 or 6 years, and then all of a sudden when we got the caster and were able to increase production, increase quality production, and sell stuff to non-energy uses, the numbers started to go the right way.
In the end, the continuous caster will become the backbone of the new IPSCO. It takes the company away from its traditional line of oil and gas-driven products and allows IPSCO to compete with the major players in North America's steel plate market. By the late 1980s, with the continuous caster and reheat furnace in place, IPSCO's efficiency and productivity have improved dramatically.
You now had a company making a very modern, sophisticated, metallurgical product of around 1 million tons a year in a marketplace that absorbed, 600,000 or 700,000 tons a year, at least the way we'd been operating in the past. You had to run a caster, and this equipment you have to run 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, or you can't make money at it. That led to the company to find what Milan Kosanovich called coil eaters. And what he was looking for was businesses in a geographic location to IPSCO that it would be sensible to send steel to it that would consume the steel in some way or another and market it, develop it, process it in some way.
The problem is, there are not enough markets for that much steel in Western Canada alone. The company must broaden its horizons and turn its attention south of the border.
2 things became a problem. One is that in order to do that, you had to reach to markets that were further afield. And transportation costs being pretty big, that became more difficult. And it became pretty apparent in the steel industry of the 80s, where trade issues were pretty dominant, that we weren't going to have much success in getting into the US from a Canadian base. So we bought a pipe mill in Geneva, Nebraska.
The pipe mill in Geneva is IPSCO's first holding in the United States, which, along with its mills in Western Canada, allows the company to be its own customer. David Sutherland, who has played a number of management roles since joining IPSCO 10 years earlier, is sent to Geneva to take charge of the new plant.
We wanted to grow in the pipe business. We ended up buying another pipe mill, which was a dormant facility in Comanche, Iowa. So after 2.5, coming on 3 years, I moved from Nebraska to Iowa.
Another important addition to IPSCO's growing international network is the purchase of the Paper Cal plant in St. Paul, Minnesota.
Paper Cal was a distributor of flat steel, and it was a mechanism that allowed steel to be shipped from Regina to Minneapolis be processed further and start developing a customer base for Regina steel in those markets in Wisconsin and Minneapolis and that area, and reaching at times as far as Chicago. Paper cal steel was important because it allowed us to, for the first time, be a sort of seller of flat steel in the U.S. market.
The St. Paul location also helps cut some of the expense of shipping steel to the United States from landlocked Regina.
It cost at the time something like $40 or $50 a ton to move coil from Regina to the plant in Paper cal. It then would cost something like $12 a ton to move it on the Mississippi River from there all the way down to Houston.
Costs are further diluted by just one of many innovations contributed by Bill Bailey, the head of IPSCO's research and development team.
One of them, I think, was developing a rail car that was designed in such a way that we could send coil in one direction and scrap back on the same car in the other direction. And the point of all that was you often would get your rail rates reduced by as much as 50%.
By now, more than 80% of steel production in Regina is continuous cast, and much of that production is heavier gauge. Over time, the winning combination of prairie ingenuity and industry know-how leads to a revolutionary breakthrough. The Regina plant develops a continuous inline production process that includes the Steckel mill and electric arc furnace, but eliminates the traditional cross-rolling, which always restricted the initial length of the slab and the ultimate gauge and quality of the plate. IPSCO's unique new process allows the original slab to be cast to the width of the finished plate. The result is a product of superior quality, produced more efficiently at a much lower cost, and all done using bargain basement equipment purchased from other steel companies.
I went out and found some junk equipment in Pennsylvania, Bethlehem steel plate, and I guess the most memorable IPSCO moment was when we made the first plate up here on that junky material that we bought. The first plate come off of there, and it was perfect. I mean, we never saw a better plate. That was a great moment for me because here we put something new together out of the junk of those industries and created a product that was prime.
While American companies like Nucor focus their production on steel sheet, IPSCO sees an opportunity to use its process to produce low-cost, high-quality plate for the North American market.
We had the Nucor idea of putting everything in line. So in a matter of 3 hours, you'd put scrap in one end, and in a very efficient way, steel comes out the other end, all in line, and very low cost.
But it is clear to Roger Phillips and his team that the Regina plant can't expand any further and is too far away to be viable to the American market. Once again, the company looks south for the solution.
So coupled with the fact we couldn't really grow where we were, Eastern Canada wasn't very attractive to us. We had a number of smaller investments in the US. Getting into the plate mill and the environment we're in became a sort of if you like, a logical step from that. So it wasn't just sort of plucked out of the blues.
Logical step or not, it is a very expensive one. To establish a footprint in the United States, IPSCO must bet the company on a financial venture even bigger than the continuous caster.
When I joined the board, these guys were starting to think about making an investment in the United States that was going to be something in the area of $500 million. Well, that was huge compared with anything they had ever thought of before. So it was really kind of a small but aggressive company that was thinking about really doing some pretty big things. And they wanted to build a mill somewhere on the Mississippi-Ohio River system.
The business decision was right. I mean, there was no future for an expanded IPSCO in Canada, so our only option was to go south, and we picked the right places.
we looked seriously at several states and actually found sites in 2 or 3 states, Kentucky, Indiana, and Iowa. And it just turned out that Iowa put forth a lot better deal for the company to build the plant, and it's also closer to Chicago, which is the largest scrap market in the world.
The plan for the plant in Montpelier, Iowa, is to produce discrete plates, a first for IPSCO mills, but something other steelmakers are already doing.
The idea there was, from the time you charged the furnace, electric furnace with scrap, everything being equal, you could ship 150 ton of plate or coil out of the mill at the back end in 2 hours. And that was because of the arrangement of the mill and the way it was set up. It worked so well, we built another one in Mobile.
The plan for Alabama is to duplicate the Iowa plant, but due to serious problems with the German company contracted to build in Montpelier, IPSCO decides to be its own general contractor.
The decision to go to Mobile, which was deemed to be in the right place, with the right set of products, with the right technology, was preemptive. In other words, got to get in there before somebody else was. It's not a question of, are we afraid to make that next investment? We've got to do it.
If you take from the period from the 70s on, the late 70s on, we made 3 significant bets where we bet the firm, and the caster was one of those, and the first of. And the second and third were the 2 steel mills in the United States, where the sheer magnitude of $500 million U.S. spend was betting the company each time.
November 3rd, 1997. More than a year over schedule, the Montpelier Steelworks is finally ready for production. A special ceremony dedicates the road leading to the plant to IPSCO's American-born founder, Bill Sharp. That same year, Roger Phillips rings the bell as the New York Stock Exchange welcomes IPSCO into the largest capital market in North America. As IPSCO moves into the new millennium, it continues to expand its holdings in both Canada and the United States. Providing feedstock for its pipe mills is part of an overall strategy that Roger Phillips calls the steel short, a tactic that makes IPSCO a customer of its steel-making competitors.
One of the things that we tried to do, even though we would provide our own steel to our plants, was that we wanted to sell more steel out the back door than we could make. So that would allow us to buy our extra steel needs from other steel producers to use in our tube mills. And that allows you in the bad times to cut back on your purchases and gives you maximum leverage.
Bill Sharp and Jack Turvey would have been pleased and possibly a little surprised at how far their little Canadian-born company has come. It has taken almost half a century, but with more than 50% of its fixed assets now in the United States, IPSCO is definitely one of the big boys.
And I think over half of our sales in the year 2000, 58%, were in the United States. So that would be the first time that we went over half. What was really happening was that we were getting more and more to be a steel company as opposed to a pipe company that makes its own steel.
In keeping with the company's size and new stature, IPSCO officials moved their operational headquarters from Regina to Chicago in 2000, making IPSCO a truly binational company.
We took a look at the U.S. and the epicenter of the usage of heavier steels, plate particularly in the United States, is the Chicago area.
By 2001, IPSCO has 3 steel mills producing 3 million tons a year. The company is 10 times the size it was 15 years earlier, producing 10 times the volume. Yet the number of employees is almost the same. As always, IPSCO remains an efficient, low-cost producer of high-quality steel.
IPSCO's grown from being, just a minor player to being a key strategic supplier to some of the biggest, manufacturers of products that consume plates, and that's a big deal.
The move to Chicago is one of the last milestones of Roger Phillips' long tenure as IPSCO's president and CEO. At the beginning of January 2002, he retires, making room for David Sutherland to take his place.
Roger set out to grow our own talent, right? And Dave Sutherland being a classic example of that, someone that Roger not only moved around from place to place to gain experience as the company grew in sophistication and so on, sent him back to get his MBA, sponsored that, and sort of building your own excellence.
In our case, we had a company with a culture and a performance winning criteria that we weren't trying to fix. We were trying to enhance it, continue it, build on it, and we had the talent that we could put in that position.
What everybody has to realize, and everybody I'm sure does realize, is that there's a whole team of 2,500 folks here, and everybody plays a role in the success of the firm.
Today, the little company from the Canadian prairies is the largest plate producer and largest supplier of large diameter transmission pipe in North America. And it is still the only supplier of its kind on the continent that makes its own steel. With business booming in a restructured steel industry and IPSCO stock at its highest ever, the company is reaping the rewards of 50 years of struggle to be an efficient producer of high-quality steel at the lowest cost possible.
Quite honestly, nobody that I know expected us to capture the kind of returns that we did in 2004 and now 2005.
Penny dropped with the U.S. investors. They suddenly realized, hey, this is a big company. It's an important company. It's a profitable company. It's all driven, of course, by the bottom line, but it gets written up by any investor, and it's being, one of the success stories.
IPSCO's success is also reflected in its acceptance by the North American steel industry as one of its leading players.
We all still lose sleep. We all still wake up in the middle of the night saying, who's coming after us? What are they going to do?
No one has done the kind of thing with what it had to start with that IPSCO has.
And it's really transformed itself from a small company doing things real well to a large company that does things well. And that's a very difficult transformation.
You've got to get to a certain scale. IPSCO now has that scale. I'm not saying they shouldn't get bigger, but the point is that they've got a scale that they can stand up to anybody with, as evidence has shown.
Aside from the first 3 or 4 years, it's never looked back. And the little orphan on the prairies has grown up to be quite a handsome young lady.